Hello, everyone. I think we are good to start. People will keep joining in, but Professor Esra has been kind enough to give us her time. So let's get on cracking. Firstly, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, based on which time zone you are. Thank you for everyone who attended and commented on our webinar last week titled the 2024 Zoo Census. Black swans, white elephants, gray rhinos, and then the entire herd kept getting bigger with pink flamingos and whatnot. So thank you from all our analysts who mewed, bleated, and meowed through all of the predictions. This time we have moved to a more classier place than the zoo, befitting the very dynamic speaker that we have with us today, Professor Esra Albayrakoglu. I hope I pronounced that right. So I know my name is Shraddha Bhandari. I am a partner at Confluence Consultant. My partner in Roulette dealing will be taking us through Professor Esra's background. But can I just say in a very nice way, her background, she's the James Bond of security and sort of strategic thinking. You know, she teaches NATO, she teaches at the Turkish National Defense University. She's grooming the next generation of students. I'm sorry, at the cost of sounding very enthusiastic, we're very, very excited to have her to make sense of the roulette that's happening in the Middle East. Before we jump on to the topic, house rules, please keep your videos closed and your audios muted. Any questions you can please put on the chat box where our sort of manager of the entire gambling scenario, Amandeep, is going to keep track of what questions you're giving forth. Good. So let's move on to the Middle East. You know, times change so fast. In either August or September, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken had made this blanket statement that the Middle East is now calmer than it's ever been, right? And what a sea change it's been with his statement yesterday that it's more volatile now than ever, maybe comparable to 1973. Right, let me just recap. Obviously, all of you have been reading the news, but let me just recap what's been happening. Hamas attacks Israel on October 7th, and all hell breaks loose. Israel launches the war against Hamas, extends it to Hezbollah, to the IRGC. The Houthis are attacking, the Yemen-based group are attacking the Red Sea shipping a lot of ways. The Iranian militias have attacked the US bases, US assets across 150 locations, or 150 assets. And then you've got minor tensions between Pakistan and Iran on the other side of the Iranian border. And then there are terror attacks, of course, by the ISIS that had more or less disappeared from the entire limelight. It's very interesting. You know, our topic today is Middle East 2024, Vegas rules don't apply. Because what happens in the Middle East does not stay in the Middle East. Of course, there are also no gentlemen's promises. There are no negotiations. Once proxy becomes your enemy tomorrow, everybody is fighting their own battles by their own groups. But since I've been doing geopolitical analysis, Middle East has been in some form of escalation or the other. Right? So over the years, the analysts have formed fairly predictable trigger points, how it's going to pan out, how the actors are going to respond. But is this time different? And this is what I'm in a unique position of posing these questions to the expert, then answering them myself. So just 4 things that are running on the top of my head. Nicholas will take you through some of the more questions. Is this the year when Iran finally plays all its cards, when all of the proxies will come together to sort of create a havoc for the West, as we call it? Is the world that's changing amenable to it? Is the multipolar world, the global South ascendants, China, Russia, all of that making Iran take these steps? Is this the year when US and Iran will directly collide, or is it just one of those elections nuisance? What are the Arab countries thinking, particularly, you know, Saudi Arabia, UAE, which had bet on economic diversification, getting an FDI? The conflict comes so close to where you are, how they're going to sort of react. And then the proxy groups. So obviously the more well-known ones are the Iranian proxies, but every country has its proxies in the region, right? So the Southern Transitional Council, for example, in Yemen. So how is this entire situation going to develop, considering that the proxies also have domestic constituencies? So in the most recent elections, Hezbollah did not do that well in Lebanon. So these are some of the questions that I have in mind, but I'm going to hand it over to Nicolas to get all the answers from Professor Esra. A very warm welcome once again.
Thank you, Shweta. Thank you for this introduction on the general theme of what's going to be happening in the Middle East and what kind of risk we should be looking at. It's a pretty tall order, as you summarize, and there's quite a lot of very big and structuring themes for this region. So for this, basically, we've enrolled the help of Professor Esra Albayrakoglu because she's an expert on those topics. So I'm going to go through a few points of her biography before we start diving into the questions. Professor Albayrakoglu, she's a professor and chair, Department of Political Science and International Relations, and vice dean at the Faculty of Economics, Administrative and Social Sciences at the University of Bahçeşehir in Istanbul. She's also a guest lecturer at the NATO School in Oberammergau, in Germany, and a guest lecturer at Eurocorps in Strasbourg in French. And she was recently an adjunct lecturer at the National Defense University of Turkey and an executive editor and author at C4 Defense magazine. So there is nobody better placed to be, guiding us through these arcanes of the Middle East and what we should be looking out for in 2024. So Esra, if you don't mind, I would like to basically jump right in and go for probably one of the most obvious questions that everybody's probably all wondering about, which is Israel-Hamas. I propose that we're going to start, very focusing on this, and we're going to be de-zooming as the conversation progresses. Israel-Hamas, I mean, what is your read on the risk that this conflict keeps expanding to the rest of the region? I mean, we're thinking obviously about the risk of an expansion of this conflict to Lebanon. We've seen some troubling signs in Jordan, Iraq, Syria, as Shweta pointed out earlier. So how would you evaluate that risk of a conflict expansion throughout the region?
Okay, Confluence team, thank you first of all for having me, hosting me in your hosting me as the first guest in your webinar series. And by the way, I'm so much humbled by your praises. And as for the distinguished audience, warm greetings from Istanbul. Indeed, Shweta talked about a much civilized setting for this webinar, but I think the Middle East is like a jungle. And as per your question, I might say that the genie is already out of the bottle. And it is not only because of the mutual offensives, but also due to a number of time-honored political, economic, and societal cleavages in the wider MENA. For example, if you look at the United States' unwavering support to Israel and the United States President Biden's swift response to the drone attack and the troop casualties in Jordan, it is once again the case that the United States, even though it wants to do so much, it cannot fully extricate itself out of the quagmire of the Middle East. And it is so hard for itself to exclusively focus on the challenges of Asia-Pacific. However, deeper engagement might trigger risks against more than 40,000 US troops deployed at multiple Middle East locations. On another note, even though Iran employs a strategic patience and so far relies on proxies to support Hamas, there is a growing dissent among the hardliners pushing for Iran to take a more clear stance in terms of going on the offensive. To add further fuel to fire, the suspension of funding by 10 Western countries to the UN Relief and Works Agency. It would create havoc among this around 6 million Palestinian refugees located here and there across the Middle East, and this would also put further pressure on the already debilitated host countries who are just welcoming these communities. As for specific examples in regional terms, they may be pressure on Egypt to take a more confrontational stance against Israel, right? But this would complicate things on the side of Egypt because it is already suffering from economic dire straits. So unstable fiscal and monetary situation, unprecedented cost of living prices, water scarcity issues, which further complicates issues of food insecurity, This is also something against the background of the latest Russo-Ukrainian confrontation, just putting pressure on the supply on food. And as for Jordan, we can speak about potential new refugees. So this would further debilitate again the already problematic Jordanian economy. The hostilities may result in higher borrowing costs, while also crippling the tourism sector. So taking into consideration how tourism is very important, comprising approximately 10% of this country's GDP, you just think about the consequences. Right? So let us hope that the conflict would not escalate. Okay, as for Lebanon, we can say that a large percentage of the Lebanon Sunni community distance from the Palestinian refugees. So Hezbollah's late and hesitant intervention has garnered broad popular backing in this country. But so far, the skirmishes have been taking place along the border. But if Israel escalates things beyond a certain notch and attacks southern Lebanon, things may assume broader dimensions. And perhaps this would create an all-out, conflagrated kind of a challenge. And this would harm further the country's economy and infrastructure. And this may also potentially trigger a sectarian conflict. As for Iraq today hosts about 2,500 American troops, and it is growing very uneasy about a renewed U.S. proactivism in the Middle East. Indeed, perhaps this is something that I may be elaborating in the coming minutes, but in a nutshell, I may say that Iraq is very much intent on, seeking to stand on its own feet. So for economic or security purposes, it wants to be self-sufficient. So neither East nor the West, Iraq for the Iraqis. So that's their motto. So therefore, again, refraining from setting clear deadlines, Iraq wants the US go because that makes Iraq clearly a target of Iranian advances. So on a global scale, perhaps we should be talking about brands, because brands, they are also the casualties of war in the first place. Brands, especially if they are international brands, they're often, forced to pick sides. So the more global a brand is, the more it feels confined as to, pick a side. But, judging by the experiences of Denmark and Russia, because if you remember the Kherson crisis in Denmark and the latest offensives of Russia against Ukraine, evaluation by statistics demonstrate that national economies are not getting hurt much. Of course, so some destabilization happens, but not beyond a certain level. Likewise, we can think that, the ongoing boycott against Israel products or Israeli-assisted products, they wouldn't be hurting Israel much. Sure. Indeed, it may also, boost its resistance. But perhaps, again, thinking in broader terms, we have to focus on ESG. And, as some of the experts already had highlighted, perhaps, security is the new S in ESG. Right, so you may be, very sustainable, you may be, socially very conscious and so on and so forth. But what happens when your products are banned in certain markets? So you have to be resilient. You have to take into consideration perhaps 3 items in your agenda, diversification, relocation, and logistical flexibility. I will also be raising this issue, when it comes to what happens in the Gulf of Aden, the Red Sea, right? So similar things are happening. So therefore, we are not immune to, we as states and companies, we are not immune to what's happening in international affairs. So we have to get ready for that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Esra. I mean, you're giving me the dream transition into the next question, because this issue of economic resilience that is being tested by this conflict in the Middle East and by the risk of an expansion is exactly what I want to be discussing next. We all know that the Houthis in Yemen, supported by Iran, have been firing missiles, armed drones at container ships passing through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, so basically at the exit of the Red Sea. How do you assess the short, mid, and long-term impact of this Houthi activity on international trade? We all know that some shipping lines have initially decided to avoid that region altogether. The problem is that the alternative is very complicated, it's very costly. I mean, if you have to pass from the Indian Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean through the Cape of Good Hope, I mean, you're adding another, what, 15 to 20 days of shipping at a very high cost of gasoline. So the idea is that we need to be able to pass through this strait at one point anyway. So how do you assess that risk? How do you read Houthi activity going forward in 2024? And another sub-question to this, and those are two actors that we have not really mentioned yet. How about Russia and China? What kind of role can they play in trying to lower the level of risk in that particular region, knowing that the Houthis are supported by Iran and that Iran is itself supported very clearly by Russia and China? How do you see those risks?
All right, the Houthi attacks on commercial ships, it's a novelty. It's an unexpected kind of thing. So this is a problem. Another new element is that they now have their own anti-ship missiles and drone technology. And this is something that is being supplied mainly by Iran, who is getting self-sufficient in terms of defense, by the way. This has resulted in, as you rightly said, a significant redirection of global trade routes away from the vital maritime corridor. So accounting for, of course, higher logistics expenses. But the problem is that I think this situation will linger. Because, you know, one of the reasons, in my opinion, for the start of this offensive by the Houthis, it is perhaps a way of diverting attention from the bad governance, poor governance. There have been dissent, opposition going on just before the Gaza crisis as to how the salaries are not being paid, and you know, many other things, so on and so forth. So perhaps, you know, this is something that the Houthis are doing. Of course, you know, in addition to other things, this is something to just perhaps providing a quick success, offering the public something like a solace, rallying the people around the flag kind of phenomenon. And indeed, you know, speaking of military capabilities, the Houthi definitely has the upper hand vis-a-vis their opponents. So if the civil war resumes, again, they would probably in a position to gain some key areas, all rich areas in Marib or Shaba governorates. So this would not only enhance the hand of the Houthis, but also prolong the crisis, perhaps. And it seems to be the case that the only way to stop them is for the Saudis to start airstrikes. But, you know, we see Saudis are very reluctant. This is also owing to the latest rapprochement between the two. The Saudi Arabia wants to concentrate on its Vision 2030. It wants to focus on its economic, economic plans, very innovative, you know, plans, and therefore it requires a stability. Right, so there is also the FIFA Cup and so on and so forth. So having normalized relations very recently, the Saudis do not want this kind of investment to go to waste. So therefore, you know, it's taking, you know, baby steps. It's treading lightly so as not to, you know, provoke further Houthi advances, calling for, you know, mediation, dialogue, and understanding. As for your comment on Russia and China, indeed, they are trying to pursue a delicate balance because, as you rightly said, Iran has been a strategic partner for both of the countries. But at the same time, both China and Russia, they have been getting along very well with the Arab world countries. So in terms of trade, in terms of, diplomatic overtures. So there has been a very friendly kind of relationship between two regional superpowers and the Arab world countries, especially the Gulf countries. So therefore, when it comes to, for example, Russia and China's abstentions in the United Nations Security Council, calling for the Houthi to stop its attacks, it is understandable. So China and Russia are not in a position to outwardly condemn the Houthi activities, but they are trying to make sure that Iran would not fuel the enthusiasm of the Houthis. So this is all they can do. Since they cannot be considered as impartial, we cannot consider, and we should not be considering them as perfect or professional kinds of mediators, in my own opinion. And indeed, they are really finding hard to just tell the Arab world that, okay, we are not that much friends with Iran, and that's the reason you can understand Putin's latest short visit to the Gulf countries, trying to give the image that, okay, I'm also on your side. So what Iran is doing indirectly in Yemen, it is not something that we just cherishly advocate, but we just take care to sustain our relations. So that was a very clear message to the Gulf countries. And this is also to make sure that, when it comes to the possible sale of, Su-35 to Iran, this is to make sure that the Arab world should not be getting enraged by this. So this was a clear message, in my opinion.
Okay, so I'm hearing from what you say that Russia, especially, and possibly China as well, they could actually play a role of making sure that this thing doesn't get out of hand, that at least it freezes to the current situation, that it doesn't get any worse, which I would like to argue from a business standpoint is good enough. I mean, if we can stick to this kind of environment, that it doesn't get any worse, I mean, we may be able to get a little bit more visibility into how things may unfold. So that's I'm taking this as a big positive, actually. To continue on Iran, we've mentioned Iran that several times. Shwada said last week that Iran is a very rational actor, that it has been particularly good at creating a network of proxies around their adversaries, obviously proxies in Yemen, but also in Lebanon and also in Iraq. How do you think that Iran will be playing their cards in this particular issue of the Israel versus Hamas war, first of all? And it's something that I would like to start engaging you with now. We're going to continue a little bit later. Iran has just joined BRICS at the beginning of the year. It's one of the Middle East powers that just joined the BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So how do you think this conflict and Iran's role could be derailing the momentum that Iran seemed to be enjoying by joining BRICS? Do you think it has an impact on this?
First of all, I have to say that Iran, simply because it's a Shia actor and a force to reckon with, can hold a sway over every Shia community in the world. So this is just something that is a basis for its forward defense strategy that was to be used as of the Arab Spring and onwards. So Iran feels as encircled as ever. So that's the reason it now believes that its security starts beyond the borders. But, when it comes to these doctrinal differences between different Shia sects, 12 Imam, Zaydism, and so on and so forth, we can't say that, Iran fully controls and its authority is fully acknowledged by every Shia community, like, Fatimiyuns, Zaynabiyuns, even the Hezbollah, right? So, speaking of the Houthis especially, yes, they are very much thankful for Iranian guidance and for the capabilities and, unwavering support, but they want to have their room of maneuver. So that's the reason I might say Iran can only direct them, under the common banner or common denominator of anti-Americanism. And when it comes to calls for multilateralism, this is also something shared by Russia and China as well. But beyond that, they are not puppets of Iran, right? Let us begin with Yemen, because Yemen is very important. So the mainstream narrative is that, Iran rocked the boat in Yemen. So the reason that Yemen today is a mess, it is definitely, something that we should be putting, saying Iran is the culprit, but this has not been the case. For centuries long, we see Saudi Arabia introducing Wahhabism and creating divisions and rifts among the very peaceful tribes of Yemen, because Yemen for so long has been self-sufficient, prosperous, and that's the reason Saudi Arabia has always treated this country as a rival. But when it comes to Iran, its influence, started as early as the Iranian Revolution, and it was based mainly on soft power. And indeed, when Iran made advances into Yemen, it was the policy of supporting some separatist southern tribes, not the Houthis themselves. So when the Houthis all of a sudden came to the forefront, organizing the opposition, indeed, organization against counter Saleh and counter Hadi, presidencies. Then Iran, okay, voila, let me just focus on supporting this country in order to just weaken the leverage of Saudi in this country. So that's the reason. But like I said, Houthis may be very much welcoming towards Iranian encroachments at the outset, but now they're minding their own business.
Sure.
And as for Lebanon, speaking of Lebanon, since Hezbollah, rather than Hamas, is a Shiite entity, and based on the dire straits of the Lebanese economy, we can say that Iran holds a more sway on this, actor. And again, when it comes to Israel, in my opinion, considers Hezbollah as, more of a threat than Hamas, right? But when it comes to Hezbollah so far has not fought against Israel for the Palestinian cause. Let us hope that this stance would continue. But the problem is that, judging by the hardliners in Iran, and first and foremost of all, this is President Raisi. President Raisi believes in a second revolution. He believes that the first revolution was something very moderate, very modest, so we have to just enlarge and broaden the scope. And Raisi wants every Iranian proxy to be remodeled in the example of Hezbollah. Hezbollah, in terms of perseverance, resilience, fighting capabilities, and so on and so forth, proven right. It has a proven, combat-proven record of winning accomplishments against a number of Iranian opponents. So that's the reason when it comes to equipping, assisting, and indoctrinating Hamas and others, Raisi is in favor of using Hezbollah to its fullest extent. Perhaps that's the biggest problem. And last but not the least, when it comes to Iraq, as I just mentioned, Iraq wants to be left alone. It wants to embrace multilateralism in its foreign and security policies, shaking hands with Germany and China and Russia and so on and so forth. That's the reason it does not want Iran or the United States to meddle in its internal affairs. As for the counter-ISIS coalition, Iraq, could not all by itself, handle this challenge, and therefore it badly and desperately resorted to the Iranian help. And now that's the reason Iran uses this to its own advantage. Okay, I'm here to stay, and if you ever dare to kick me out, there will be consequences. And another problem within Iraq is the Hashti Shabi forces, which were incorporated into the Iraqi army. Some of them are very much advocates of Iran, whereas some others are sick and tired of Iranian big brother position, and they want to be part of the original, Iraqi army. But still, when you look at the overall picture in Iraq, even the two foremost clerics, Sistani and Saad, they believe that Iran should behave itself, stick to its own limits, and treat Iraq as an equal peer.
I see. Thank you very much. I think it's very important to remind everyone that proxies are not necessarily fully controlled by their masters. It's a very interesting point that you made. I used to look at the Asia Pacific a lot, and there was always, this similar question being asked about North Korea. Is North Korea, the pit bull of China? And they remind us very often that there's only so much that China can do to control North Korea. I mean, those proxies, they have a life of their own. They have strategic objectives of their own, and it's very important to remember that. I think for the sake of time, because we need to keep some time for the Q&A, I'm going to regroup two questions that I wanted to ask you. It's about Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. What kind of role do you see for them as peace brokers in this region? And I would like to tag this into the other question about BRICS. The fact that those two of those countries, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, but also Iran, Egypt, and Ethiopia, just joined the BRICS Plus grouping. So how do you see a role for those middle powers in the region as peace brokers, number one? And how do you see this conflict and the potential that those countries may not have enough influence to calm things down? How do you see this as a danger to the momentum behind BRICS Plus, if any risk at all?
All right. Again, when it comes to offering good offices, acting as mediators, you have to be impartial. You shouldn't be taking sides. So therefore, we can't say that Saudi Arabia and the UAE, they can be the potential candidate for this kind of task. Indeed, beyond that, we also have Turkey, we have Qatar, we have China. And how to say, when it comes to the Middle Kingdom, it always wants to find a middle way. Since China is known to be very impartial, refusing to meddle into the internal affairs of other countries, it always focuses on win-win scenarios across the Belt and Road Initiative, so on and so forth. It may stand out, right? But when it comes to how this ends up within the structure of BRICS, okay, so far BRICS has been a platform in which the constituent countries gather and engage in dialogue, but not in a substantial way. And many of them are in a relative decline. Well, of course, we can't say that they are witnessing some kind of an economic dire straits, but they're not a miracle at all. And they haven't created a difference in world affairs or world markets. And sometimes the more is not merrier, to speak of. So perhaps we will end up in a cacophony. And when you look at the composition now, indeed, the original composition. So think of the latest confrontation between India and China back in 2020. And think of the diverging opinions in line with the Russian aggression against Ukraine. Vladimir Putin himself cannot set foot in South Africa because then, he would be facing consequences because, South Africa is part of the ICC, International Criminal Court. So there are already these existing divergences, problems, complexities. So, I don't know, when the UAE, Ethiopia, would make their presence, would it be something for good or bad? It may be something to cherish in terms of at least pluralizing international affairs, perhaps. They may be raising their voice, articulating perhaps certain injustices to perhaps challenge the narratives of the West. But speaking in economic terms, de-dollarization, okay, this is something that is happening mainly in bilateral terms. So speaking of some examples, for example, when it comes to some deals between, certain member countries in BRICS, they have started to trade with one another in terms of local currencies. But when it comes to institutionalizing the whole thing within the overall framework of BRICS Plus, this might take time, right? And indeed, when it comes to the pace, not every member, may be adapting itself fully and easily and rapidly to this de-dollarization wave, right? So I have certain, how to say, not opposition, but I have some questions about how the new framework would just move on.
I agree with you. I agree, Esra, that de-dollarization, I mean, it is a mammoth of a project if we get there eventually at all. But I do think that any step, and I've said that in a couple of interviews that I gave earlier to UAE-based media, I do believe that any step, however small they are a very strong message that is being sent. But I could not agree with you more that it could take a while before we get any close to this. In the interest of time again, and so that we can start taking questions from the floor, I would like to wrap things up here with asking you a very open question, a very personal question. Esra, I mean, you're observing this region from a security standpoint, from a geopolitical standpoint for a while. What gives you hope? 2023 ended very badly. We're starting 2024 with serious challenges on our hands. What gives you hope? And do you see any safe havens in the region? Safe havens, I would say political safe havens, economic safe havens, social safe havens.
Oh, right. So they say in the Middle East, a pessimist is simply an optimist with experience. So, okay, in my opinion, it is hard to name a place as a safe haven, including my own country, which is suffering from a number of problems, which may be just augmented by the coming elections and afterwards. But the thing is that still we have some countries who are eager to mediate between the conflicting parties. But the thing is that the war is getting technological. And the machinization of this war fighting makes states or non-state actors think that they can do whatever they want and get away with impunity, because using technology makes you score less casualties. So it feels that they can do it. So this kind of an understanding, it is definitely not something good for the future. And this is already something unfolding in the latest Russo-Ukrainian debacle as well. So it is bad. But if we are to quote from another very influential person, Henry Kissinger. So if you would like to, talk about order, then you have to take into consideration Egypt and Syria. So, Egypt is like Syria. They have connections. They are regional forces to reckon with. They have this extricate ties with many of the actors throughout the Middle East. So therefore, these, when it should be that these two countries are stable and prosperous for us to breathe a sigh of relief, perhaps. So we have to start with this. And when it comes to hope, I'm speaking of technology, I'm not hopeful because including Turkey, almost everyone in the region, including the Gulf countries, they are very much obsessed with localizing, indigenizing their own defense industries. And they're helping one another for this. So Turkey is offering know-how, joint production, and joint research opportunities. So you see, Qatar, the UAE, very much being able to manufacture their own capabilities. Which means that the more they are militarized on their own terms, the more they would feel that they have the means to broaden their room of maneuver. This may not be much to the liking of greater powers, which may then feel further to, impose themselves into the regional balances. So things may just get out of control, okay? And perhaps one one piece of hope would be there are still people engaged in peace journalism, peace education. There are peace activists, especially when it comes to the latest, Hamas and Israel debacle. There are bi-communal movements and non-governmental organizations calling for moderation and dialogue. And this leads me to my final quote from Queen Rania of Jordan. So when you want to have the peace in the Middle East, you need to have guts, not guns. So I still very much feel enthusiastic to see these hopeful people. Yes, they're being alienated, by their friends, families, and perhaps by their governments, but still they are calling for hope and peace. Perhaps, their voices will be heard.
Thank you, Esra. I mean, guts, not guns. It's a nice way to summarize what is needed in the region. Thank you very much for this discussion. I think Amandip, it would be time now to open the floor to questions. And if you can basically, share with us some of the questions that were being asked.
Yes, thank you, Esra, for that. That was a very, very enlightening conversation. I really enjoyed that. I also I was taking some notes down because it was just so interesting. Some of the things that you'd mentioned, I think one of the things that stood out for me personally was how soon after Ukraine, the invasion or the surprise attack against Israel by Hamas happened. And it seems like that time or that space between the two attacks would have taught markets lessons about diversifying supply chains, reducing economic dependence. And now we've had the case where things are being diverted across away from the Red Sea. So I guess one question that I have is, how quickly do you think economic lessons from this can be executed at this stage? Of course, military action against Houthis would suggest that any kind of external pressure against Houthis isn't quite working. So any economic lessons from this that we can take or that we can implement, how long that would take and how long can we sort of fix the economic repercussions of this event?
Very good. So I think companies would first of all engage in not only following the recent developments in international affairs, but getting prepared for it. So identifying and reducing commercial exposure to geopolitical risk is something that is substantial. And a good geopolitical risk profile of a company won't just provide information on the geopolitical risks facing that company, but we should be getting ready for the consequences if and when these kinds of risks would be actualized, right? So will we be handling all these things all by ourselves, or will we be joining forces with countries facing similar challenges? Or should we be opting for new markets, or should we be diversifying our products, or should we just adopt a new kind of marketing strategy in these kinds of situations? And in the case of Houthis, logistical flexibility is key. So perhaps rather than sticking to a single plan, plan B, plan C might be good. Of course, I'm looking at things from a strategic studies view. I'm not that much political economy expert, but just basic logic tells me that you have to, for example, perhaps try to take the pulse of developments. Perhaps follow some consultancy companies, especially if they are making research on early warning signals, right? So because when you anticipate things, that then you start preparing for them. So just we should go deeper when it comes to just learning more about the countries, especially when you are when we would like to open to them, or when we are already existing in them.
Very good. We also have a question from Ron Keller along the lines of joining forces. For any sustainable peace process in the Middle East to succeed, should the West not reach out more towards Iran instead of imposing sanctions, etc.? Because without ownership of Iran of the process, it will continue to fail.
I totally agree. Indeed, Iran's narrative is that, okay, I may be engaging in nuclear things, but I am still a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and its additional protocol. And whenever the International Atomic Energy Agency, inspectors knock on my door, I always welcome them. And when you look at the annual reports of the same agency, it has always been the case that there is nothing wrong with the promises that Iran had done in the past and the present regarding the responsible use of the nuclear power. But on another note, you have Israel and the Diona facilities. They are the largest in the Middle East. And so far, remember, Israel has been in a nuclear denial, saying that no, I'm not involved in any kind of nuclear weapons production. But eventually, it turned out to be the case. Or when you look at North Korea and 3 years later in 2006, it immediately started nuclear tests, right? But still, when you look at Iran, Iran has been the recipient of the harshest sanctions, even though it is fully in compliance with the standards and the regulations, right? So this is definitely unjust. And indeed, there is the Ayatollah's fatwa, not only regarding the nuclear power or nuclear weapons, but against weapons of mass destruction. So it is strictly forbidden to engage in developing and using such indiscriminate weapons, right? So, or when it comes to the Vienna talks or JCPOA talks, you see Iran behaving responsibly and strictly, walking the talk, right? So we should be giving them a chance because for many occasions they have proven that they are a man of words, right? And they are right at the center of the Middle East. How would you not, simply discard Iran? This would be self-defeating. If you look at history, the Congress of Vienna, 1815. First of all, it excluded France, but then it turned out to be the case that if you would like to have sustainable peace, stability, and prosperity in Europe, you need France. And this is a very good example to be replicated in the future, in my opinion.
Apologies for that sound, by the way. There was a bit of a crash outside the window. So from Iran to another regional hegemonic power, and this is a question coming from me, how would any sort of deeper engagement from Saudi and UAE change the dynamics of the conflict or of the peace process in the region, in your opinion? Or what even would that sort of deeper engagement look like if things were to move in a more peaceful resolution kind of direction?
In my opinion, it is very hard to follow Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. Indeed, just before the signing of the Abraham Accords, and even before that, you see the United Arab Emirates trying to carve out a specific policy, specific place for its own, trying to pull itself out of the clutches of Saudi Arabia. That's the reason it moved away from Yemen and pulled itself out from Eritrea and so on and so forth. And it then signed the Abraham Accords. How to say, in a very contrarian, kind of policy, if you look at Saudi Arabia. But now, and in addition, United Arab Emirates was, and still, it's hard to say, until now, has been very much friendly towards Iran, right? Trying to just find a way out, pursuing a third way or something. But all of a sudden, you see, for example, when it comes to the latest Houthi aggravation in Yemen, United Arab Emirates began calling for more US offensive action against the Houthi, even including the designation of Houthis as a terrorist organization. But on another note, you see the Houthis engaging in Saudis for so long when it comes to a long-term normalization of things in the country. Saudi Arabia has been using drones against civilians, and this collateral damage has been a problem in US-Saudi relations for so long. It was something condemned by the UAE as well, right? But now you see Saudis cherishing, an Iranian-backed, actor, whereas the United Arab Emirates, it is in a position that it puts, Iran, at an arm's length, and not, thinking a way out as to how to just find a way out of this Houthi quagmire.
Right, and we have another question from the audience. Biden mentioned that the US will withdraw its troops from Iraq, and I saw the comments on the news the other day, and he said that it is just a propaganda for the upcoming American election. So I want to ask whether, do you think it is intended for the election of the US, is sincerely intended to withdraw its troops for other strategic purposes, such as focusing on other areas of regions or regions?
So, yeah. The stated reason for the stay of a number of US troops in Iraq is the possibility of a resurgence of ISIS. Indeed, there has been substantiated evidence for this. Yeah, there have been sleeper cells, even within Syria. But when it comes to 2017 and onwards, you see them being scattered across Africa mainly and Asia. And indeed, they are stealing roles from Al-Qaeda. So they are very much alive and kicking. And so indeed, when and if there is an ISIS resurgence, then Iran would use this as a pretext to further involve in the Iraqi affairs and Syrian affairs. So that's the reason, and also for the sake of supporting and buttressing Israel. As the guardian of this country, the US has to stay. Yeah. In my opinion, they will stay.
Just a reminder to the audience to please mute your microphone if you haven't already. This question about US action in election season, it does make you wonder if anything that is done on the global stage is separate from kind of domestic agenda. We have one more question, and I think Nicolas will also be able to add on to this. How far can the India-Middle East corridor go while the conflict is blazing in the Middle East? So obviously we've spoken about BRICS today, so it will be interesting to see how this collaboration can advance as we progress.
Yeah, first of all, there should be stability for some kind of economic projects to flourish. And judging by the latest confrontations in the Baluch area of Pakistan and Iran, in the Baluch regions, respectively, you have, for example, on the Iranian side, you see Bandar Abbas and the Chabahar, ports. And when you look at Pakistan, you see Gwadar. Gwadar is very essential when it comes to the China-Pakistan economic corridor, and it is not yet fully operational, but still both countries are enjoying the fruits. The same can be said for a very exclusive kind of relationship between Iran and India. So India is a very much energy-hungry country. It is industrializing at a giant's pace. And indeed, when you look at the Trump administration, there was a special kind of arrangement between the two. India was supposed to get Iranian oil at cheaper price, provided that Iranian, grain especially and other food items would be delivered to Afghanistan. But things have changed. But when it comes to this deal, it is more or less in place. And indeed, this may be something that may bring the whole parties together, because India, Pakistan, and Iran, they have been suffering more or less similar challenges, and they have a stake in terms of getting more fruits out of their economic facilities, activities. So it would be nice that they would gather to find a way out of these dire circumstances in the wider Middle East. I see hope. So if there are courageous actors to offer this kind of opportunity as functional way out, because if you are focusing on the opportunities, then you are less focused on saying the differences of opinion and divergences and so on and so forth. Perhaps if these kinds of win-win scenarios are much broadly articulated, then, perhaps it might make a difference.
Thank you. If there is no other question from the floor, I would like probably to wrap things up with a question of my own. You mentioned Donald Trump, and I think it's something that could be a major changing factor in 2024. I mean, most scenarios show that Donald Trump is very likely to be back in the White House early in 2025. Do you believe, Esra, that a second Trump presidency could have any impact, any positive impact, potentially a negative impact on the conflict between Israel and Hamas, on the risk of an expansion of the conflict? Trump is known, and the first term that he had showed that he's a deal maker. He's someone who looks for deals, for quick wins. Is that a good thing? Should we cheer for a second Trump administration, at least in terms of international policy, or would it add another layer of uncertainty, which is definitely something that we do not need right now? How do you see this?
Okay, the reason why Biden is back into the game in the Middle East, it is because that during the election campaign and also when he came to power, he said America is back. So Biden felt the necessity to walk the talk by being there whenever things necessitated. But when it comes to Trump, remember, Trump was an isolationist, at least in comparison to Biden, and he was in favor of pulling the United States out of certain institutions that America has pioneered. And indeed, judging by the second civil war that the United States has been undergoing, and again, judging by how Russia has set its eyes on Alaska this time, in my opinion, Trump will not be considering the Middle East as a strategic kind of place. It would focus on taking control when it comes to the internal dissolution of the United States, because this is very much fitting into his own agenda if it wouldn't change, of course.
Okay, so definitely more space for the likes of China, Russia in the Middle East. Definitely, a Trump presidency could create a vacuum. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions from the floor? Any last-minute question that anybody would ask?
We seem to be at the end of the questions.
All right.
Just to sort of very, very interesting. Thank you, Professor Esra. There are just three things I will leave the audience with. Proxy groups, first and foremost, all of them have their domestic compulsions. It's very interesting to see how proxies have developed in relation to Lebanon. I would urge all of you to look at the election results and how things have panned out there. In Yemen, Houthis are not the only group, as Professor Esra said, and the major Arab powers has differing views on who they support and how they support and where those groups are based. So the Bab el-Mandeb Strait is a very interesting case study of how two opposing proxy groups supported by different countries are fighting over it. So that's like a trigger that everyone should watch. Red lines, we keep saying that the conflict is escalating. We, as Confluence, we monitor red lines. Every red line has been breached in the last 3 months. From taking out, at one point of time, taking out top IRGC commanders. I think that was breached when Qasem Soleimani was taken out in 2020. But the number 2, the number 4, the number 5, all have been taken out by Israel. Top Hamas leadership has already been taken out. There hasn't really been any retaliation just yet. Almost 3 days since the US troops were attacked in Jordan, Syrian border, and nothing has come out except for a lot of sort of play things coming out. So let's see the red lines. Let's see how things are escalating. But I think this constant hamper about, oh, it's escalating, it's going to involve everyone. We can just all, from a business standpoint perspective, just calm down on that for a bit and see very clearly what the red lines are, what the trigger points are, and how all of these countries are sort of imagining themselves on that. And let's not give too much credit without understanding what the proxy groups are, how they relate to domestically. I think Esra made a beautiful point that Iran, yes, provides the material support, provides the moral support, but they've got their own power structures. Remember, Hezbollah is now a power in the Lebanese government. Hamas was obviously in Gaza, and the Houthis were this close to getting power in the Yemeni peace process. So that's it from my side. Just some things to look out for, without any concrete solution. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Shweta. Thanks for this summary. We're going to wrap things up now. I would like to thank everybody, especially Professor Esra Albayrakoglu, for her time and for sharing her insights on this. I thank the entire team at Confluence for organizing this. Thank you all for participating today. We will be posting the recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel, so do subscribe to the Confluence YouTube channel. We will be continuing this series of webinars in the next few weeks. One that I would like to talk about already is a very interesting webinar that we will be holding on most likely on the 22nd of February regarding artificial intelligence. The developments of artificial intelligence. We will be looking at technological developments, issues of governance around artificial intelligence, but also the geopolitics of artificial intelligence. We will be lucky to have Mr. Stanley Chen Chiu-Fan, who is a PRC-based science fiction writer, an expert on artificial intelligence, who will be guiding us through this discussion. So do tune in, keep in touch for the upcoming webinars. And thank you to everyone. Have a fantastic day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.